Creator, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those whom we serve. Amen.
Budget address. Minister responsible for finance.
Mr. Speaker, approximately 1 year ago, I stood in this Assembly and introduced Budget 2020 as part of a journey. I described it as a foundation from which we could build a positive fiscal path forward towards long-term economic growth and stability. There were already negative economic indicators, but I said that we should not describe our circumstances as a crisis. I said that I was cautiously optimistic that achieving our priorities and building from a solid foundation was possible with discipline and planning. At the time of tabling Budget 2020, I did not predict that last year's budget session would end abruptly to focus government efforts on a pandemic that was creating a public health crisis, not only in the Northwest Territories, but across Canada and around the world. The need to shut down to contain the virus resulted in an economic crisis for the Northwest Territories, a crisis that has impacted people in different ways, as many have lost their livelihoods or face precarious financial futures.
Mr. Speaker, the world has and still experiencing a crisis. While levels of government move with speed and collaboration to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, we are experiencing how quickly things change.
In tackling the pre-existing challenges of our undiversified economy, made only more immediate by the impacts of the pandemic, we should remember that the economy is not a thing. An economy is the way that we as a society choose to allocate our resources to serve our families, our communities, and our society's needs and wants. Education and opportunities for our children and grandchildren, appropriate health care, housing, and food. Challenges and crises provide opportunity and motivation for needed change and for unified effort towards common goals. Knowing all this, I remain cautiously optimistic about our future. I do not arrive at this optimism lightly, and I will share 3 reasons with you. First, the people of the Northwest Territories have confirmed that our brand of Northern spirit, resilience, and community is stronger than ever. We all saw the power of coming together to follow health protocols, support our local economy, take staycations, and find creative ways to continue to deliver goods and services. Second, our fiscal structure has insulated us from even greater economic shocks and allows us an opportunity to preserve stability as we look towards recovery. While in many other times, many, including me, have expressed concern over the challenge of an undiversified economy, in the present economic climate, having a large public sector has helped support continued levels of employment and disposable income. Territorial formula financing, among other federal supports, has kept our revenues comparably stable. And last, and where I will spend the majority of this budget address, is on the foundations we have started to build for a healthy, resilient, and more diverse economic future for the Northwest Territories. With the anxieties of the pandemic ever present, I did not realize just how far we have actually come in the journey I spoke about 1 year ago until I began to prepare for this budget address. As I will soon describe, we are building foundations for a well-educated population, healthy and safe families and communities, and economic opportunities, both territory building in scale and at community levels. And we are changing the way we do business to give better value for the people of the Northwest Territories. Mr. Speaker, while delivering the budget this year, it is important to directly acknowledge the need for economic recovery. That fact does not diminish the reasons for optimism I shared earlier. Just in time to be reflected in Budget 2021, we have the benefit of the Business Advisory Council's report, speaking to both relief and recovery from COVID-19. The report highlights the need to focus on education, green technology, and our opportunity to not only move towards green energy solutions, but to be part of a critical mineral value chain that will supply the world with the technological requirements for greener energy, as well as business support through government procurement, catching up on our infrastructure across sectors, and more and better opportunities for equity participation by Indigenous governments. I feel optimistic knowing that we all share similar goals. And again, the foundation to achieve those important asks are reflected in this budget. The strength, resiliency, and creativity of the Northwest Territories population cannot be overstated as an economic benefit. I heard directly from many residents and organizations during budget dialogues last summer that although there is anxiety and worry, people continue to believe we can achieve stability and growth. There was a desire for fiscal stability, which this budget provides by avoiding cuts or new taxes. There was also a strong connection drawn between long-term investments in people, including education and health, and future financial well-being, which is also reflected in this budget. Another strong theme was the need to know that the government will be efficient and fiscally responsible with an eye on the future. This last ask is the goal of the Government Renewal Initiative that I announced in October and which is now underway. This does not require new funding from this budget, but it will be a significant government-wide effort to ensure our fiscal house is in order. Mr. Speaker, I present Budget 2021 as a stability budget that builds on the foundations we have set over the past year and allows further opportunity to advance many important projects. In this time of uncertainty, we propose to carry on with $2 billion in expenditures and no spending reductions. Over the next few minutes, I will share details of the work happening across departments that will support our economic future, describe ongoing investments in our people, our anchor industries and our communities, and what is being done to ensure government efficiency so that I can continue to stand in the Assembly and say that we should look with optimism towards our future. Mr. Speaker, we estimate that the Northwest Territories economy shrank almost 7% in 2020 because of the immediate and severe economic disruption caused by the global coronavirus pandemic at the beginning of the year. By the end of 2020, we saw the predicted economic rebound begin, and we expect economic activity this year to continue to recover from the 2020 low. The Northwest Territories economy in 2021 will likely remain smaller than it was in 2019, and the risks and challenges remain the same as before the pandemic's economic shock. Until the global health crisis is under control, a full recovery of the territorial economy will be slow and uneven. Industries such as local retail, construction, and public administration have seen faster returns towards pre-pandemic strength, while hard-hit sectors such as tourism, hospitality, airlines, mining, and wholesale trade continue to struggle. Global lockdowns and border closures, reluctance or lack of opportunity to travel by air, and reduced international demand for diamonds, fur, and Aurora tours means our hardest-hit sectors will take more time to show signs of recovery. Long-term challenges such as maturing diamond mines, an aging population, and a lack of economic diversification or private sector activity will depress future growth unless there are substantial structural changes. Long-term structural challenges must not be underestimated. Meanwhile, we must remain vigilant about public health orders because more coronavirus cases in the territory could dampen economic recovery. Putting forward a recovery plan while still in the midst of an evolving crisis is challenging. We need to invest when the moment is right to catch the wave of recovery while not underestimating the full extent of the pandemic and invest too soon. With a spirit of knowing what we can accomplish together, especially when collectively motivated, we are working to develop our recovery roadmap. It will evolve as the distribution of the vaccines changes the way we respond to the pandemic. We should all feel encouraged that with the vaccine, the can-do attitude shown by the public service from the earliest days of the pandemic through to the vaccine rollout, the creativity and patience of the business community, and the investments proposed in Budget 2021, we can move quickly with a flexible and responsive recovery. The GNWT is a large player in the territory's economy. Budget 2021 has no reductions because right now the economy needs support. Despite welcomed additional federal transfers since last March to help us keep our residents safe and our economy working, we expect to spend more on programs and services in 2020-21 than what we will bring in as revenues. For the third year in a row, we anticipate that we will have an operating deficit. This means that we needed to borrow more than expected for the capital budget, and debt is projected to increase to $1.33 billion by March 31st, 2020. In Budget 2021, thanks again to increased federal support, we are projecting revenues to be higher than operating expenditures, which will produce a $69 million operating surplus. However, we need more than this operating surplus to pay for the $441 million capital plan approved last October, and to start reducing the debt that we have already accumulated. Revenues are projected to be $2.2 billion in 2021-22. We are expecting lower amounts of our own revenues, especially corporate income tax, resource royalties, and revenues from the airport, Yellowknife Airport, and Marine Transportation System revolving funds. The federal government is providing additional funds above the typical annual transfers, and our fiscal independence has weakened as a result. The combination of increased transfers and lower own source revenue has increased the federal contribution to our total revenues from an average 81% to over 85%. While territorial formula financing arrangements provide a stable and predictable revenue base, we are facing serious risks to our own source revenues. A slowing economy will likely mean several years of declining tax revenue, especially corporate and personal income taxes and potentially little resource revenues. Furthermore, we face significant risks to both our own revenue base and federal transfers if our population starts to decline. Mr. Speaker, we have chosen to balance our need for revenue by supporting a competitive tax regime for small businesses, reducing the small business tax rate from 4% to 2% effective January 1st, 2021. In an average year, this will result in foregone revenues of about $1.7 million annually, but provides greater value by leaving small businesses with more resources to grow the economy. Continuing our usual practice, we will increase property tax rates and some fees to match inflation. As we agreed by signing the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change, our carbon tax rates will increase to $40 per tonne of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions on July 1st, 2021. Although this will add 2.4 cents in additional tax to a litre of gasoline and corresponding increases to other carbon-based fuels, our suite of carbon tax rebates will continue, and the cost of living offset will increase on July 1st to $208 per adult and $240 per child to help residents adjust to the higher carbon price. Mr. Speaker, we are proposing to spend $2 billion on programs and services in 2021-22, an increase of $117 million from last year's budget, a result of $132 million in new spending that is partially offset by $15 million in savings. Not all of this funding will be rolled into the operating budget expenditure base for future years, such as the $41 million for various COVID-19 supports included in the budget to continue to keep our communities and residents safe. We are hopeful that our evolving response to the public health risks will make a portion of the $35 million for the COVID Coordinating Secretariat included in this budget unnecessary, with the need for the Secretariat phased out over the 2021-22 fiscal year. The budget includes $4.3 million for contributions to our schools, to ensure that learning continues while we keep our children safe, and an additional $1.1 million to student financial assistance for extra support to post-secondary students for their increased education costs because of the pandemic. Excluding the COVID-19 Coordinating Secretariat and other COVID-related supports, Budget 2020 includes $2.3 million more for new asset amortization costs and $90 million in new spending. This new spending includes $23 million to maintain existing service levels in some programs, $40 million to enhance programs and services already offered, and $26 million to further our priorities. Over 60% of our spending on programs and services goes to investments in our people and to keep our communities healthy and safe. Spending on social programs and communities underpins a healthy economy. We propose in this budget to increase spending on these vital programs by $64 million, including $20 million for initiatives that directly address priorities of this Assembly, $28 million to continue or enhance work already underway, and $16 million to address funding pressures such as in income assistance, medical travel expenses, and shelter funding. Budget 2021 includes $4.5 million to complete the phased approach to bring child and youth care counselors to all regions of the territory to support young people facing a range of personal or social issues. This program will provide year-round support and ensure that help is available after hours. We need to better protect vulnerable children, and we are proposing to add $7 million to the Child and Family Services budget for this purpose. These new resources will expand the ability of Child and Family Services to address gaps in the system and to accelerate implementation of its quality improvement plan. The additional resources will compress what was a 5-year plan into 3 years, with the second phase expected to be completed shortly and the third phase in 2021-22. The funding will increase the number of community social service workers, family preservation workers, child and youth placement coordinators, foster care and adoption workers, and case aid workers to help vulnerable children and their families. The Office of the Children's Lawyer is experiencing an increased number of clients, and we have included an additional $99,000 in funding to support service availability. Mr. Speaker, we want our families to be healthy. We propose to renew and improve the Healthy Family Program with $1.1 million to help parents ensure their children get a good start in life. The Healthy Family Program was redesigned with support from families, communities, and other partners to better reflect early childhood development and culturally based prevention priorities. A good start in life needs to include opportunities for early learning and quality childcare. One significant reason for the lack of licensed childcare spaces is the high costs of infrastructure to start up or expand operations. By providing ongoing funding of $500,000 in this budget to subsidize facility repairs and renovations, we will help increase the number of daycare spaces and improve childcare availability and affordability. Before remote learning became a common concept across Canada last March, the GNWT had already introduced the Northern Distance Learning Program so that youth in remote communities could remain with their families and still have access to educational opportunities available in larger centres. We are adding an additional $1.2 million for the Northern Distance Learning Program in this budget to fulfill the next step in the multi-year plan to improve and enhance services and make the program available to more students. If we want better education outcomes for our children, we need to ensure that our schools use the best practices and that these practices have the support of parents and students, education staff, and Indigenous governments. This budget includes $306,000 for the first year of a 3-year plan to modernize and renew the Education Act, to support an education system that will set our students up for success. We're also proposing to include $265,000 in this budget to advance the development and implementation of competency-based professional standards for junior kindergarten to grade 12 educators. Connecting students to jobs is good for the student, good for business, and good for the economy. With an additional $508,000, we propose to hire career and education advisors in the Dutchow, the Sawtoo, and the South Slave regions, similar to the advisors already in the North Slave region. These advisors will work with the students and their parents and guardians to provide information for the transition to post-secondary schooling, provide advice to Aurora College students on northern job opportunities, promote the school's North Apprenticeship program for skilled trades and certifications, and help post-secondary territorial students connect with employers. As the territory's population ages, the GNWT plans to significantly increase long-term care spaces where they are needed most. We have added $406,000 in this budget to address increased costs for long-term care services currently provided by Avens. Budget 2021 includes $1.1 million to train more personal support workers and licensed practical nurses through Aurora College to care for long-term care residents with graduates who have gained their skills within our territorial community. Community governments deliver services that are vital for the survival of our communities and our economy. To help reduce the gap between the cost of providing municipal services and the revenues that communities can raise themselves, we propose to increase annual community government funding by $3.3 million. Communities can count on their share of this revenue to continue year over year to more adequately fund their operations and water and sewer system services. However, we estimate that there is still a $16.4 million funding gap for these community budgets. We will continue to work with our community government partners to address this gap. We are exploring better ways to keep our communities safe. This budget includes a $303,000 proposal for a pilot community safety officer program that will be community-led and developed using best practices from other jurisdictions to guide implementation. Administered by a community government, community safety officers will be a visible presence in the community to deter crime and will develop close working relationships with the RCMP, municipal and territorial enforcement agencies. These officers will not carry weapons and will actively work with citizens in a culturally appropriate way to promote community well-being. Budget 2021 includes a number of other investments in justice programs. We are proposing to continue work already started with the Government of Canada with an additional $158,000 in 2021-22 for finalizing and implementing the gun and gang strategy. This work supports community-level prevention and enforcement efforts to address criminal activity arising from organized crime and to appropriately design a response to the violence, fear, and harm created by gangs. In response to increased demand for court sittings, we propose to include $233,000 to create 2 new sheriff's staff positions in Yellowknife. We have also included $123,000 in this budget to address rising costs for providing services to inmates at the North Slave Correctional Complex. The demands of round-the-clock law enforcement in our largest city, combined with new training requirements, means it is necessary to include $422,000 in this budget for 3 more RCMP constables in Yellowknife. Finally, we accept the recommendations in the 2020 Judicial Remuneration Commission report by including $257,000 in this budget for additional compensation and training opportunities for territorial court judges. The 19th Legislative Assembly has a clear priority to increase the number of affordable homes and reduce core housing need. The 2021-22 budget proposes to provide the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation with the first $5 million out of a total of $15 million over 3 years, so that it can participate in the National Housing Co-Investment Fund and expand the number of housing projects it can undertake. We also propose to provide the corporation with $300,000 to help low-income homeowners replace aging fuel tanks and an additional $109,000 to assist emergency shelters facing increased costs due to inflation. We are proposing to add $4 million to the Income Assistance Program to address both an increase in clients and changes in allowances. Escalating drug and non-discretionary supply costs, as well as more patients requiring out-of-territory care, have put huge expenditure pressures on our health system, We are addressing these pressures with a further $30 million for increased healthcare expenditures in this budget, including $8.4 million in federal funding to improve services under the First Nations and Inuit Home Community Care Agreement. This additional funding addresses some of the annual average overage in the Department of Health and Social Services budget, such as $7.5 million to reflect the 24 hours, 7 days a week nature of operations, $3.4 million for medical travel, $1.8 million for supplementary health benefits, and $4.2 million for out-of-territory hospital and physician services for residents. We recognize that the need for $30 million in 1 year to address the fiscal challenges in our healthcare system is significant. The Department of Health and Social Services has developed a sustainability plan to ensure the long-term fiscal viability of our health services in the face of mounting costs, so that residents can continue to receive the best possible physical and mental health care. We are proposing $280,000 in this budget to extend the community-based peer support program started this year for people with mental health and addictions issues. Increasing evidence is showing that supportive relationships between people with common experiences help reduce hospitalization and distress and improve the quality of life of participants. As part of our ongoing partnership with Canada on home and community care, we are proposing a $290,000 increase in the budget to further support the Paid Family Caregiver Project and fund project software to improve service delivery. We are looking in this budget to maintain the momentum to preserve, revitalize, and strengthen Indigenous languages, with $600,000 in continued spending to develop an Indigenous Languages Education Immersion Diploma in partnership with Aurora College, the University of Victoria, and Indigenous governments.
This post-secondary programming will be used to help develop a new generation of proficient Indigenous language speakers, and workforce can be filled. Occupations requiring the ability to speak Indigenous languages.
We have also partnered with Canadian Minority Language Development and proposed to include $711,000 as a continuation of the Canadian Northern Territories Agreement on Minority Language Education and second official language instruction. This fund will provide for French language education in schools and the Collège Nordique Francophone.
Mr. Speaker, the coronavirus pandemic has hurt some businesses more than others. Many businesses will take time to recover, and others may close permanently. The pandemic was yet another reminder that the dependence on government and the resource industry makes the territorial economy extremely vulnerable, and our past approach to implementing economic strategies has not done enough to provide economic diversity, stability, and strength. A successful future economy needs investments in lifelong education. That is one of the main reasons we have done the legislative groundwork to transform Aurora College into a polytechnic university. We also need to ensure that we have processes in place to monitor and evaluate our post-secondary programs so that students can be assured that our educational programs meet the required standards and quality found at other Canadian universities. To achieve this, we are proposing to add $177,000 for a quality assurance coordinator to maintain quality instruction at the post-secondary level. Over the past year, the tourism sector and many of the hospitality and accommodation businesses associated with it have been especially hard hit by the impacts of the pandemic that crippled travel and tourism worldwide. The Northwest Territories remains a spectacular destination for Canadians and international travelers alike, and we want to remind the world of what we offer as a destination. The proposed $936,000 in this budget for a renewed Tourism 2025 investment strategy is intended to help our tourism sector to return to 2018-19 levels of visitors and spending by 2024-25. by preserving funding of existing programs and introducing new services and activities, providing training for operators and tourism staff, and gathering data to better reflect and guide the evaluation of the investments. The challenges in our resource sector are rooted in the global market, but we can still find effective ways to support this vital part of our economy. We need to provide clarity, certainty, and an inclusive approach to balancing priorities of exploration, development, community involvement, and environmental stewardship. We have the opportunity to position the Northwest Territories as a leader in responsible resource exploration and development by drafting sensible regulations that do not discourage resource development while still providing the environmental protection that Northwest Territories residents expect. This budget includes an additional $360,000 in 2021-22 only to develop the regulations for the Mineral Resources Act that came into effect near the end of the 18th Legislative Assembly. We also propose to maintain the Mineral Incentive Program by reinstating $400,000 for 2021-22 and propose $225,000 for the continued implementation of the Petroleum Resources Strategy. We are continuing to implement our commercial fisheries revitalization strategy for a viable Great Slave Lake commercial fishery. To support commercial fishers on Great Slave Lake, we propose to include $150,000 to expand the role of the fish officer position while the fish processing plant is being built in Hay River. We also propose a $100,000 contribution to assist the Tucho Fishers Cooperative to complete the work necessary to put the plant into operation. On the recommendation of the Standing Committee on Accountability and Oversight, the budget includes $510,000 to further address the mandate priority to increase the amount of food produced locally. We propose to direct $110,000 of this funding to the Sustainable Livelihoods Program to work with partners to develop and deliver harvesting training courses, including safety and navigation, harvesting and processing skills, and food preparation. We also propose to allocate $400,000 of this funding to implement a food safety framework and develop appropriate food safety regulations that will help remove obstacles that prevent residents producing their own food and distributing to others. We intend to sharpen the focus of our efforts to address unauthorized land occupancy by proposing $309,000 to address untenured and unauthorized occupants on public lands. We will use these funds, along with participation from Indigenous groups and Northwest Territories residents, to identify ownership, determine if occupancy is based on traditional rights, offer tenure to land if appropriate, or move ahead and remove unauthorized occupants. We also intend to support better land use planning with $253,000 to staff in the Waukesha Land Use Planning Office. We aim to link our support for regional economic development with opportunities in the knowledge economy by proposing to include $350,000 to capitalize on our knowledge economy strengths and establish regional economic development plans with our partners. The Northwest Territories is at the forefront of the effects of climate change and sees its impact on our environment, wildlife, and people. In October 2020, the GNWT allocated $2.6 million to support 5 departments in staffing 14 new full-time and 2 new seasonal climate change-related positions located in Yellowknife, Hay River, Fort Smith, and Inuvik for implementation of the 2030 Northwest Territories Climate Change Strategic Framework Action Plan. Budget 2021 plans to continue this work with an additional $2.6 million. This funding will be used to help the Northwest Territories transition to an economy that uses fossil fuels less intensively and is better able to adapt to the effects of climate change on the natural environment, human health and well-being, culture and heritage, infrastructure, and the economy. The GNWT is also establishing a Northwest Territories Climate Change Council to include Indigenous governments and organizations, community governments, and other external partners, including non-government organizations and industry representatives, in the implementation of our action plan. The Council will play a key role in strengthening the leadership and authority of the GNWT on climate change. We are pleased to honour the Delaney-Gatineau Government Financing Agreement with $199,000 for incremental grant funding, equivalent to funding received by other communities. As announced last July, we propose to invest $631,000 in this budget to create a gender equity unit to lead and coordinate all of the work being done to advance equality in the Northwest Territories. With these resources, we want to better ensure that government decisions, including financial decisions, consider their sometimes unequal effect on people with different identity factors, such as gender, race, ethnicity, religion, age, or abilities. We want to support all departments and agencies to consider gender and identity factors so that they can improve all services delivered and advance the goal of a more inclusive society. This work is just beginning for us, but its purpose has been enshrined in Canada's Charter of Rights and Freedoms and called for in the Calls to Justice of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. With an expanded unit, the GNWT can better serve the public by incorporating the perspectives of people from across the gender spectrum in its activities and assessing how diverse groups of Northwest Territories residents experience government policies. We have added new spending to this year's operating and capital budgets without finding any savings or new revenues to pay for them in order to be a source of stability while we navigate globally uncertain times. As we advance in this Assembly, we will need to set ourselves on a better expenditure track if we want to be able to continue to make investments that will provide for a strengthened and diversified economy for the future. Mr. Speaker, not every initiative requires significant new funding. Some of the most important work we are doing towards improving our economic outlook and fiscal governance does not have its own budget line. For example, we have established a working group to find ways to reduce red tape for small businesses. The working group will look at regulations and processes used to enforce regulations that affect small businesses and will ask why we have certain regulations and assess the risk if the regulation is removed or the process changed. We expect the working group to provide recommendations to improve regulations so they achieve their reason for existence with the least administrative burden possible. We have also recently announced the formal start of the procurement review. In addition, on October 30th, 2020, I announced the next steps in the promise made in our first budget to use creativity and innovation to do better with the resources we have and move away from any pattern of spending that allows duplication. Starting immediately, the Department of Finance will be working with other departments to implement the Government Renewal Initiative. Government renewal must take a comprehensive and whole-of-government review. The renewal starts with individual departments, but will quickly extend to reviewing programs and outcomes that are shared across departments. We will be using program evaluation techniques, gathering objective evidence, and reporting on outcomes associated with the spending of public money to help inform financially responsible and sustainable policy choices. The vision is to help departments build their budgets based on the value delivered in the service of public priorities, rather than on incremental growth. This is a shift in the way we think about budgeting, and the need for close coordination and clear communication between government and members of the Legislative Assembly as the work progresses will be essential. We all have a role to play in ensuring that the GNWT is an effective and sustainable organization for the long term, and that all of our decisions are driven by value and priorities that serve residents across the territory. Once a stronger culture of outcome evaluation and the processes of value-oriented budgeting are in place, the ongoing benefit for delivering on priorities will make the time and resources spent worthwhile. Mr. Speaker, the health, social, and economic crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic has showed us the power of pulling together as a society and as a government in pursuit of a common goal. As we have done across the Northwest Territories in order to limit and contain the spread of COVID-19, we need to take advantage of this collective spirit to keep the momentum going towards the common goal of supporting the recovery and future economic growth. Budget 2021-22 is not itself a COVID-19 relief package. Our recovery cannot be a one-time event. It will need to reflect the changing landscape of this pandemic, including the vaccine rollout here and across Canada, and the speed of the global economic recovery. Budget 2021 provides stability and builds on the foundations of economic growth that we already knew we needed last year. I remain cautiously optimistic about our economic and fiscal future, a future for all Northwest Territories residents. Through engagements with the business community, I know the frustrations and fears are very real. But what they have said about our economy and ideas for change is not a surprise. That leaves me optimistic because I see the work we are doing to address those calls for change. Similarly, after conducting extensive budget dialogues last summer, we heard the calls from residents to ensure investments in people, to avoid government duplication, find internal efficiencies, and ensure value for public dollars. This also gives me the confidence that our initiatives are on a good path. Budget 2021 continues to invest in healthcare, communities and community services, early childhood supports, education modernization, including in distance education, and progress on the Climate Action Plan. There are also investments towards a modern regulatory landscape for our mineral resource sector and public lands. Furthermore, we are advancing regional growth initiatives, such as the Great Slave Lake Fishery and exploring LNG feasibility. The three mandated infrastructure projects, the Mackenzie Valley Highway, the Tallston Hydro Expansion, and the Slave Geologic Corridor, continue to progress. In addition, there is an expansion of the Mackenzie Valley fibre optic line to Tuktoyaktuk, and the Government of the Northwest Territory is supporting the Cleachoe government to run a fibre optic line to Wati in conjunction with the final work on the Cleachoe All-Season Road. These projects, together with work announced by Northwest Tel last fall, means that all Northwest Territories communities will have access to high-speed internet by 2023. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic is still with us just as much as the economic problems that pre-existed it. Our work to respond to all of these challenges is underway. Added to that is the resiliency of the people of the Northwest Territories. That resiliency is also not new, but it has been particularly strong and present through the pandemic. A resiliency that includes creativity, innovation, and collaboration. With these foundations, we will build a healthier and more sustainable economic future for the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Colleagues, we'll continue after a short recess. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for justice.
Mr. Speaker, corrections can be a difficult and challenging field. In addition to the demanding environment and 24/7 operations, the Corrections Service must always adapt to the ever-evolving best practices. 5 years ago, the Auditor General gave us a path forward to address conditions that focus on our case management and programs for offenders, and as a result, significant changes have been made. This summer, a new Corrections Act will come into force, signaling a shift towards a greater focus on rehabilitation and reintegration, and enhancing transparency and accountability of correction services. We are moving in the right direction and have made progress, but clearly more work needs to be done. Over the last number of years, the Department of Justice has heard various concerns raised by Corrections Service staff regarding their workplaces. To fully understand and address these concerns, the Deputy Minister of the Department of Justice initiated a workplace assessment to hear directly from staff across various levels and locations of the Corrections Services. This work was conducted by an independent contractor to encourage honest, confidential discussions. The goal was to hear from as many employees as possible. I want to thank and commend the staff who took time to share their workplace experiences, both good and bad, with the consultants. It shows they care, are passionate, and want to be involved in making improvements and constructive change. The final assessment report identified specific areas where we are doing well and areas where we need to do better, including staffing, policies and directives, safety, leadership and support, and communication. The report also highlighted the need for management to do a better job engaging with staff prior to implementing changes. The Department of Justice provided the report to staff to allow them time to consider solutions moving forward. Senior leadership held numerous meetings with staff in December to discuss initiatives currently underway that will help address some of the concerns and to open the lines of communication and listen to additional solutions to address the areas where improvement is needed. Mr. Speaker, some of the actions we are currently undertaking include revising and updating the Corrections Northern Recruitment Training Program, implementing new processes to ensure staff receive recertification training in a timely manner, a full replacement of uniforms to ensure they are complete and fit appropriately, and continued participation in appropriate leadership training for supervisors and managers within the Corrections Service so they are better equipped to support and lead their staff. Meetings between management and staff will continue so that site-specific operational challenges and issues can be addressed collaboratively. I want to assure members that the Workplace Assessment Report will not be shelved and forgotten about. The report laid bare issues across the Corrections Service, and we must confront those issues head-on. The Department of Justice will be held accountable for their response to the concerns raised by staff, and Mr. Speaker, they want to be held accountable to ensure that these issues are addressed to the best of their abilities. However, there is recognition that the Department of Justice cannot make all the necessary improvements on its own. There is need for a more collaborative working relationship between the Department of Justice, the Department of Finance in their role as human resources, as well as the Union of Northern Workers, or UNW. Acknowledging this, a working group has been established, chaired by the Assistant Deputy Minister Solicitor General, and will include senior officials from both departments, as well as the UNW. The working group will report progress to the Deputy Minister of Finance, the Deputy Minister of Justice, and the President of the UNW. This group will listen to and learn from our dedicated corrections professionals as the team works collectively to improve corrections services workplaces. This working group will oversee the development and implementation of a Corrections Service Workplace Assessment Accountability Framework, a monitoring and evaluation process, and a staff communication plan. As outlined in the Department of Justice's business plan, the Accountability Framework for Corrections, previously called the Human Resources Plan, will be established before the end of this sitting, and all of the initiatives in the plan will be implemented by 2024. I commit to providing updates on the progress that the Department of Justice is making towards improving correction services. We must remember, our goal is always to ensure the safety of corrections staff and individuals within the system. To feel safe, our staff must feel supported in their daily work so they, in turn, can successfully support probation clients and inmates as they work to make necessary changes to reintegrate back into our communities. Our employees are hardworking, professional, and dedicated, and with their help and the help of the working group, we will make positive change to the corrections work environment and, as a result, to the safety and the people in our care. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Mr. Speaker, the Government of the Northwest Territories is committed to strengthening our leadership and Authority on Climate Change, as well as enhancing efforts to stabilize the cost of power and increase the use of alternative and renewable energy. As part of these commitments, our government has made almost $26 million in energy-related investments this past year, which are highlighted in the 2019-2020 Energy Initiatives Report, which was released in January. Designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, provide reliable energy to our communities, and stabilize the costs for residents. These projects highlighted in the Initiatives Report support the goals set out in the Northwest Territories 2030 strategy. Some of these projects include the ongoing work being done by our partner, the Arctic Energy Alliance, or AEA. With federal funding from the Low Carbon Economy Leadership Fund, the AEA launched a series of new and enhanced programs. Some of these help lower-income homeowners winterize their homes and provide rebates on new electric vehicles and energy-efficient products. In fact, this past year, AEA doubled the amount of rebates provided to households. Mr. Speaker, the GNWT also continues to roll out the Greenhouse Gas Grant Program. This year, $274,000 was awarded to a northern-owned plumbing and heating company here in Yellowknife. The company will install wood pellet boiler district heating system that will supply heat to its headquarters and the GNWT central warehouse. This system also has the potential to connect other private commercial buildings in that area. Once completed, this project is expected to displace 190 tons of greenhouse gas emissions, and save 60,000 liters of oil annually. Mr. Speaker, progress is also made this year with the proposed Tolston Hydro Expansion Project. This project has the potential to displace greenhouse gas emissions while supporting efforts to stabilize the cost of energy and create significant opportunities for Indigenous participation and benefits and employment opportunities for all Northerners. As part of the GNWT's assessment for the Tolston expansion, the GNWT has signed an agreement with the Arctic Research Foundation to map 2 potential submarine transmission line routes on the lakebed of the Great Slave Lake. As identified in the Energy Initiative Report, the expedition included the participation of students from Lutzelk'e and Yellowknife area who received hands-on training from scientists and local crew in advanced mapping technology and marine vessel operation. Hopefully, these students will use this experience to inspire new and creative solutions for the future. Mr. Speaker, the GNWT is setting the stage for other ambitious energy projects. One example is the Inuvik Wind Project, another key initiative under the 2030 energy strategy. This project will see a 3.5 megawatt wind turbine installed, reducing diesel consumption in our largest off-grid community by up to 30%. Late last year, we secured a land use permit and water license from the Gwich'in Land Water Board. The GNWT looks forward to advancing this project to the construction phase, realizing its environmental, economic, and regional benefits. Mr. Speaker, these are just some examples of how exciting energy projects are happening across the territory today. The GNWT will continue to engage directly with communities and Indigenous governments and organizations to ensure their participation, partnership, and empowerment when proposing and implementing energy solutions. We all have a role to play in making sure that the Northwest Territories meets its climate change objectives. Through government support and individual action, we can make it happen. Kuyinaini, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Minister statements. Minister statements. Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to advise the House that the Honourable Caroline Cochrane will be absent from the House for a portion of today's proceedings to participate in an urgent conference call with the Council of Federation and First Ministers meeting. Kuinani, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Deputy Premier. Minister statements, member statements, member statements. Member for Nunakput.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the last 2.5 months I've been home, and this is basically what I've seen, the struggles that our communities that are going through, my home community of Tuk, and I could only imagine the rest of the communities across the territory. You know, this COVID-19 world, Mr. Speaker, it makes it tough on everybody the way gatherings and stuff are happening right now, and I think that we really have to thank our frontline workers, our nurses, our CMP, the teachers, our Hamlet staff, the community corporations, the bands, our IRC staff and the Guchin staff for all the hard work that they do. Mr. Speaker, we have to start looking and focusing on the little things instead of healthy families, healthy living across our territory. We have our youth. We have to provide more programming. We don't have enough funding through the local community governments are stretched, and IRCs getting assisting the community corps to help provide services and different programming that we need so bad right now because of COVID-19. You can't basically do anything, can't travel. Same thing with our adult care programming, you know, for treatment and any kind of treatment that people need. Our elders care programming, more funds for the communities to do this, to work with MACA, I guess, and to get our sending in and to getting counselors and grief counselors and all kinds of coming into the community for a week instead of having to call them and work with them and sending in teams once a month to each community to help people get through this. Our communities are hurting, Mr. Speaker. I see this more and more. You know, we have a $27 million revolving fund for alcohol and drugs. I see how alcohol and drugs affects my constituents because we have nothing going on. There's no work up there. What could we do to help them? We have to provide some sort of service for them. We have to provide service for them to getting treatment in the Northwest Territories, Mr. Speaker. They need help, and giving them options other than doing that means getting them work, getting small projects in each community. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you, member for Nunakput. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude his statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Speaker, we need projects to help our people, to consistent help and cost of living for struggling, paying bills, food, power. You know, Mr. Speaker, what we can do, what we have to do, assist our local community governments, provide more funding services, provide to say that we have a role to play as a government and as all 19 members, you know, to try to help our people. Let's put our talk to the test for this, our budget 2021. Let's put that to the test now. I want to see helping our communities on the daily struggles, supporting our local leaders and our mayors, Mr. Speaker. We have to do better as a government. We have to do better as all MLAs to help our people in the small communities and not just the big and the capital. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Nunakput. Member statements, member for Nivictun Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On the morning of January 18, 2021, I read a CBC article with a video of a man crawling out of a Southern Emergency Department and a nurse walking beside him, and he stated that she was saying, "You're a big boy, you're strong, come on, big boy, stand up," only to find out later that he had Guillain-Barre syndrome, which was affecting him to walk. Mr. Pontone also had a history of bipolar, so he felt that's why his concerns were dismissed. Mr. Speaker, it made me think of Hugh Papik and the death of a Klavic elder who died of a stroke after being mistaken for being drunk. In the CBC article that I found, his niece had said the staff in the elder's home and the Klavic Health Centre wouldn't treat her uncle because they mistook him for being drunk. After an external investigation, it provided 16 recommendations. One of the recommendations was the Northwest Territories to implement a mandatory culturally safe training for all healthcare workers. Mr. Speaker, I sat and wondered how many with mental health issues or who are Indigenous and people of color are treated in our health and social service system in the NWT. We all know it happens. Those of us who fall into these groups take it, and very few complain. Little did I know that morning would put me in a situation that I was not planning. Mr. Speaker, I have been to the emergency department here 3 times since being elected, twice to advocate for my children and once for myself. 2 out of the 3 times, I did not expect the treatment that we received. And yes, I said advocate, because sometimes our youth and our elders and many others, especially those from small communities, feel that they are not heard or they don't say the right things. And sometimes the questions they are asked, they don't understand. Mr. Speaker, as a nurse and a past emergency department manager, all I can say is that the way we were treated, it was unacceptable, and I am unsure as to why we were treated that way. Was it discrimination? Was the staff having a bad day? I don't know. But what I do know is that it was something that we hear far too often. Do we have to feel guilty or that we're putting the staff out of their way because we are sick and asking for help? No, that's what they are paid for. But this is the power that they hold. Mr. Speaker, I'm sure you would agree that anyone who walks into an emergency room or any health center, clinic should be treated with the same, no matter their race, medical history, addictions. None of this should change the way that they are treated, spoken to, triaged, or cared for. I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you, Member for Nuvik-Twin Lakes. The member is seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you. I am not painting everyone with the same brush. I know that not all staff are like this, but I am bringing this to this floor so that everyone out there can hear. People need to be responsible for their actions, and we need to hold them account to that, even as co-workers. So if you witness this happening in your workplace, this needs to be addressed. If it's happening to our residents need to feel safe to report it. The only way things will change is if we make the change. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nuvik-Twin Lakes. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Thabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's now been 11 months since COVID-19 was declared a pandemic by the World Health Organization. That's nearly 1 year we've been dealing with this global health crisis, a crisis which has disrupted nearly every aspect of daily life in one way or another. Mr. Speaker, I know that in any pandemic situation, the core mission of a government is to protect its citizens and combat and eliminate the disease that's plaguing the planet, which in our case is COVID-19. However, secondary to that objective is to help the economy to stay afloat. To help the economy, we as a government must stimulate the business community with much needed aid and assistance. Mr. Speaker, just yesterday, the Premier cited $120 million worth of federal funding that the government of the Northwest Territories has received to date to help with the effects of the pandemic. On the surface, that sounds like a lot. But when you break it down, it doesn't amount to a lot of financial aids spread out. $86 million went to the COVID Secretariat. $28.8 million went to the airline industry, which was much needed. $1.583 million went to MACA for sports, leaving $4.3 million for incidentals, not necessarily going to small and medium-sized businesses. All sectors of our economy have taken a huge hit as a result of this pandemic, and many businesses, particularly small and medium-sized, are struggling to survive. Mr. Speaker, right now, the NWT does not have a long-term economic stability mandate. According to the Conference Board of Canada, the economic sectors hurting the most right now in the Northwest Territories are mining, oil and gas, tourism, accommodations, and the food industry. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you, Member for Thabatra. The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
However, even beyond the statistics, just by entering a business within any of these sectors, you'll notice an impact. You see the decline in customer base wherever you go. This is very concerning, especially for businesses who rely on regular face-to-face customers to make an income. Not all businesses have been able to adapt to the pandemic equally. There have been high levels of job and income losses for many people within the private sector. How much more of this can the business community take? There's only so much slack that can be given to a business community to maneuver through this pandemic. Mr. Speaker, the economic effects of this pandemic are far-reaching. It has changed our lives completely. As a government, we have a duty to help all sectors of our economy to be sustained and insulated as much as possible over the course of this pandemic and beyond. If we do not address the needs of the business community, we may not have an economy to return to once this pandemic is over. I will have questions for the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment later today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Thabatra. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Tunade-Wilday.
Mr. Speaker, I wanted to report back to the House about my recent constituency tour. I made it a clear point to visit all 4 of the communities in my riding just before Christmas, and I did just that within a 2-week period. Aside from my home visits, some highlights were going out supporting our arts and crafts programs in Dilo, Deda, and Denny Nuquan. And I participated in an art program with my daughter Cicely in Dilo that was facilitated through one of our local talents in Mr. John Rombo. Through all the hustle bustle of this job, it was nice to sit, slow down, and then create something that you can be proud of and also making new connections with our constituents. In saying that, Mr. Speaker, I learned a key lesson in my last visit, that yes, laughter is good medicine, but then I realized the land and culture is even more powerful medicine than that. Case in point, in my visit to Lutselke, there was a moment where I saw a powerful connection between our youth, elders, and the land. At one point during the visit, I witnessed an elder speaking Chipewyan to the youth and learning how to set snares and traps. And this program was facilitated through the LKDFN Wellness Program and the Thai Denanena Program, which is funded through ENR, and I wanted to thank the Minister and his team for that. Mr. Speaker, in that moment, I saw youth completely engaged, learning not only the old ways, but learning language, practice skills, and using their hands to learn. I saw youth that were enjoying themselves, laughing and stay away from the bad elements, and I was quite happy to see that in action. And Mr. Speaker, no one knows what's going on at the community level than the community members themselves. I believe that this government needs to take a hard look and start implementing more of these programs to help those in need heal. I also believe this can be a powerful tool to start addressing some mental health issues, addictions, education, and justice issues. Mr. Speaker, I just spoke to community member in Litli Coin about a new program called Journey to My Best Self. It has been being facilitated by Shake the Dust Hope Consulting. It's a 30-day healing program that will focus on mental health and addictions. Long story short, they have an outpouring of requests from inside and outside the community to participate in this program. And they will definitely need help in terms of staff and funding to ensure success. And above all else, the influx of requests also sends another message. Our people are screaming for help. To finish up, Mr. Speaker, a small group of us visited an elder at their cabin while I was in Puyallup and sat down with some fresh bannock and tea. I listened in with a couple of youth and took in some good old-fashioned storytelling. There were no phones or electronics, just a face-to-face sit-down and lots of laughter. How can you beat that? Mr. Speaker, and I'll have questions for the appropriate ministers at a later time.
Thank you, Member for Tunde-Welday. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Decho.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I recall during a briefing from the Department of Infrastructure recently, the Minister stated that the Highway 3 repair budget includes the Betchco to Yellowknife stretch. Mr. Speaker, we all know the ongoing problems with that stretch of the highway and the amount of resources, labor and financial that is directed to that stretch of highway on a yearly basis. Mr. Speaker, my community recognizes the increase in delivery trucks to service the diamond mines, and there are many. Highway 3 is one of the busiest highways in the NWT. Highway 3 stretches from the junction of Highway 1 at Highway 3 to Yellowknife. The forgotten stretch is from the junction between Highway 1 and 3 to the Detcho Bridge. This is all on the south side of the Mackenzie River. As anyone will note as you drive in from the junction, you're suddenly bouncing along the highway from ditch to ditch. I believe this is termed as a washboard road, the dreaded word that grader operators are not too fond of. Mr. Speaker, there have been many repairs to various stretches of the highway on the south end. This may contribute to an over-imbalanced highway considering the increased amount of truck traffic. Mr. Speaker, I will have questions for the Infrastructure Minister at the appropriate time. Masi.
Thank you, member for Detcho. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, if there's anything the last year has taught me, it is the importance of communication. The ability to express ourselves so that others can understand us, or being easily able to connect with someone in a time of stress, goes a long way in allowing us to be happy, productive, functioning members of our society. In many ways, communication is a key component to our positive mental health. Being able to easily communicate is something that many of us take for granted. Without the ability to communicate, a person can become socially and mentally isolated. For example, if they have trouble hearing, it can be difficult to communicate their needs to others. If their motor skills are impaired, they may not be able to use the technology required to contact the help they need. In the North, many seniors lack the ability to communicate for a variety of reasons, and as a result, they cannot access the help that they may need. Some of these barriers are financial. For example, for many seniors, purchasing hearing aids is financially prohibitive. Currently, in order for an individual to acquire a hearing aid, they must pay thousands of dollars up front and then be reimbursed from the insurance provider. Many seniors simply do not have the financial means to pay out of pocket for items up front or wait on reimbursement. As well, access to and the cost of batteries are further hardships our seniors should not have to deal with. Other barriers are both financial and technological, such as access to and navigating the internet. As was recently seen, without access to the internet or an ability to use it well, our vulnerable senior population encountered many issues when trying to book their COVID vaccines. Unable to navigate the online booking, we heard from many seniors that when they did try to call the number provided, their calls went to voicemail, which was usually full, and they couldn't leave a message. Or when they did finally get through to an operator, they were just told to go book online. Vaccination clinics for seniors need to have dedicated phone lines to assist our most vulnerable population to ensure that they are booked for their vaccines. We have heard from several seniors about the stress and anxiety that navigating the booking system has caused them. Many of our seniors have been living restricted lives for almost a year and desperately want this vaccination in order to resume a better quality of life. To them, not to make it easy for them to access is almost cruel and shows how our seniors often fall through the cracks. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to finish my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. The member is seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, advertising in the newspaper and spots on the radio are both places that seniors may hear about vaccine clinics or any news relevant to them. Posting notices on community bulletin boards or in places seniors may frequent, such as the supermarket or senior centre, would also be useful. However, it is not good enough to just get information out there. There needs to be the proper resources in place to deal with these inquiries, dedicated staff to respond to these calls. Additionally, beyond just the COVID era, We need to ensure that services are provided to seniors that enhance their lives and support aging in place. Seniors need and deserve affordable access to the internet, training and programming to aid in technological literacy so they can use it, as well as specialized mental health and wellness support specific to their needs. We need to make these changes now to ensure that we have healthy seniors and elders. We cannot allow one of our most vulnerable populations, and I would argue one of our most valuable, to continue to fall through the cracks. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. On October 30th, the Minister of Finance announced something called the Government Renewal Initiative, and she discussed it again today in the context of the budget. The Minister said, quote, "We are going to use the current climate of recovery and renewal as an opportunity to reimagine how we obtain, manage, and control those financial resources," end of quote. The Minister painted a rather grim picture of our finances due to the significant capital spending which has driven up our short-term debt. The Government Renewal Initiative is supposed to lead to what she calls value-driven budgeting through a review of all GNWT programs and services, department by department, with a framework early this year. It's not clear when regular MLAs will be engaged or involved in the Government Renewal Initiative, and whether that will be before decisions are made. It will also be important to secure buy-in from our workforce and the general public through clear communications. While I believe in program evaluation, I want to make sure that both short and long-term effects of changes are carefully weighed and considered, as well as differential impacts of any changes on communities, regions, and disadvantaged populations. I'm also concerned that the amount of time and effort that is likely required may not be enough or fast enough to head off the looming fiscal crisis where our debt limits are exceeded. We need to make tough political decisions now on what the priorities are and where the NWT should be. You can't set out trying to realign your spending unless you know what your spending priorities are going to be. I've outlined my priorities, Mr. Speaker. I push for housing, education, childcare, energy self-sufficiency, and a more diversified economy, rather than the massive spending on large infrastructure projects of dubious value that have driven us into increasing debt. I'll have questions later today for the Minister of Finance on the Government Renewal Initiative about whether it can deliver the desired results and how it will be implemented and communicated. Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Frame Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, over the last 2 decades, the safety of staff at the North Slave Correctional Centre has been repeatedly raised as a concern by members of this House, and here we find ourselves again. In November 2004, Range Lake MLA Sandy Lee stated that morale, sick leave, abuse, forced overtime, problematic hiring practices, lack of support, inmate staff confrontation and assaults, and micromanaging plagued North Slave Correctional Centre. And then in February 2006, Justice Minister Brendan Bell proposed new funding of $1.4 million to support correction officer training and staffing in the 2006 and 7 main estimates. In March 2013, Justice Minister Glenn Abernathy stated that both frontline and management staff need to have appropriate training so that they have the tools, resources, and support to fulfill their duties while maintaining the safety and well-being of their clients, colleagues, themselves, and the public. The minister went on to say that correction staff participated in one-on-one independent survey to answer questions about their training and working environment. In June 2015, Range Lake MLA Daryl Delaney read in a committee report responding to the OAG's report on corrections, saying the committee is encouraged that the minister accepted the Auditor General's recommendations and has developed an action plan to implement them. This report included recommendations to improve management policies and procedures. In October 2017, Cam Lake MLA Kieran Testart also raised alarms, identifying officer training, equipment, and staff budgets had been cut, and that officers were being forced to work exhausting shifts without relief, and that staff morale was low. Mr. Speaker, in December 2020, CBC reported about an NWT Corrections Facility workplace assessment, which we heard about from the Minister today, that was commissioned by the Department of Justice. The CBC article quotes a frontline correction staff as saying there's a good chance someone is going to get hurt, and attributes this to poor staffing, employee turnover, training, and morale. For decades, these themes have been repeated. Staffing concerns have been raised, much-needed funding provided, audits completed, employee engagement offered, and action plans written. But with high staff turnover, continued funding and long-term change is needed. The lip service to the public and staff has remained on point, giving correction staff hope. But hope without real change just erodes trust even deeper, leaving morale even lower than when you started. Mr. Speaker, I don't want my comments to be a footnote in a future member statement. Today I want assurances that the Minister of Justice is taking action now to resolve the persistent staffing and morale issues that continue to plague the North Slave Correctional Centre. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Cam Lake. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Mumfree.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to speak on behalf of the interpreters, but before that, when we speak here, some days they speak too fast for the interpreters, because when I have my earphone on, some speakers are really fast speakers. Today, the interpreters are very important for the Northwest Territories. Without them, everyone would be speaking only English. At the hospital, at the court services, in any government offices, they all speak only English. So when we look at the interpreters, they are very important to us, and we want that services available. And this is what I want to speak on my member's statement.
Interpreters and translators allow us, as Dene people, the speakers, the knowledge keepers, to coexist in an English-speaking world. Without them, Mr. Speaker, English will be the only option in the hospitals, health centers, in the courts, and also in the government offices and legislative assembly. Without our professional interpreters, we would be marginalized and isolated. So today I want to express my deep appreciation for all the hard work of our interpreters here in this building and outside this building. The commitment of our interpreters, wherever they are, including right here, again, in the Legislative Assembly, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as important as our Dene interpreters are, their professions are being taken for granted by this government. At one time, interpreting was a thriving profession. With a former language bureau and a training and certification program through our college, now today, Mr. Speaker, interpreters and translators are no more than 10 certified interpreters in the entire territory. That's the whole Northwest Territory, Mr. Speaker. Most of these 10 are at the near retirement. A little has been done to train more, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is nothing less than an emergency. I intend to ask the government how they're responding to this emergency in the Northwest Territories. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Mumfree. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North.
Mr. Speaker, Michael Burchell, former constituency assistant for Cam Lake, Frame Length, Yellowknife Centre, and my friend passed away over the holiday season. He was not yet 30 years old, but in his short time on this earth and in our north, he worked tirelessly to help others. From a young age, Mike felt a calling to serve. Whether volunteering every available hour to a territorial campaign or something small, like helping a friend carry groceries, Mike was there. Mike was always there. I don't think I've met anyone who simply cared about others the way Mike did. His altruism was unironic, his love uncomplicated, and his laugh almost too authentic. Mr. Speaker, Mike didn't spend long in our north, but in that time he fostered countless friends and helped numerous constituents. Connection was a fundamental principle to him. He felt every person he met deserved what was, in retrospect, the most precious thing he could give, his time. If you met him, you wouldn't have forgotten him. He made sure of that. As MLAs, I know many of us would be lost without our constituency assistants. They are frontline workers who must master the inner workings of government. They help people get income assistance, housing, health care, and so much more. When I was first elected, Mike helped me set up my office. Many people who have held office in this legislature benefited from his talents. More than a colleague, he was a friend to many. He was my friend, and he will be deeply missed. Though he is gone, he is not lost to any of us. The time he spent with others will always remain in the memories of those who loved him. His influence can be found in many of the words of Hansard. He believed in the power of words, and never more so when they are spoken within a form of democracy, like our Legislative Assembly. I'm confident he would be given great solace knowing he enters a form of immortality by becoming words in Hansard. Michael Birchall. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Yellowknife North. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Nahende.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to say the situation in Fort Leonard continues to improve thanks to the support of the GNWT. Yesterday, I talked about the amazing work the community of Fort Leonard has done, and today it's about the GNWT. Upon confirmation of the case of COVID in the community, the Rapid Response Team was deployed into the community and did an amazing job of testing and informing the community of what had happened. I'm happy to say that they have been demobilized. It is my understanding that one of the nurses from the team has remained in the community to follow up on test results and provide support to the local nurses. The health centre continues to provide support for emergencies and patients that require medical attention. As for the first vaccine clinic, it went very well. I'm happy to say a good percentage of residents received their vaccine and are looking forward to the second one within the second month. In speaking with the Mayor, she wanted me to thank the Premier for who reached out to her from the very beginning and continued communicating through the difficult times. As well, she's happy with the support she received from the Deputy Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs, Associate Deputy Minister of COVID Secretariat, and the MACA regional staff. They had been helpful during this difficult time. The local and regional COVID Secretariat staff have been doing an amazing job, working long hours to ensure the residents' safety and helping out at the border. The government developed a communication plan called Dear Fort Liard campaign with CKLB, and it was a hit. Many messages of support were offered to the community members. It is my understanding APTN National News will be doing a story on the campaign. Mr. Speaker, school staff are well prepared and innovative in their approach to teaching and learning in response to the school shutdown. They were quickly able to prepare and make remote learning packages available for the students. Chromebooks, Turbo Sticks were delivered to the high school students to enable them to complete and submit their final projects online. The Department of Education, Culture and Employment implemented new services delivery options for income assistance to ensure continued support for residents. These alternative measurements provided safe, efficient access to income support programs and services and allowed for income exemptions of other government funding intended to assist residents with the outcome in lockdown. On behalf of the community, I'd like to thank the government from the bottom of my heart for all the help they have and are providing for the community during this time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nahende. Member statements. Member statements. Member for Hay River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I would like to commemorate one of my predecessors, the Honourable Paul Delory, who passed away on New Year's Day earlier this year. Paul served Hay River as a member of the Legislative Assembly. He served the Northwest Territories as the Speaker of the House, and he served the community as a prolific volunteer and outstanding citizen. Paul was first elected to the Legislative Assembly in 1999, defeating 6 other candidates and earning the privilege of representing the newly created constituency of Hay River North. He was elected again in 2003, that time by acclamation, and for a final time in 2007. In 2011, he announced that he would not seek office again, retiring with a perfect 3-0 record. To this day, Mr. Speaker, constituents tell me stories about the effort that Paul put into assisting them, sometimes hinting, I think, that I better live up to the standard that he set. In addition to serving his constituents, Paul served the entire territory as Speaker of this House in the 15th and 16th Legislative Assemblies. My colleagues who had the pleasure of working with Speaker Delory have always spoken highly of his performance in that position, citing his character, his professionalism, and the seriousness with which he approached the role. Mr. Speaker, the level of civility displayed in this House differentiates our Legislative Assembly from virtually all legislatures in Canada and, frankly, around the world. We pride ourselves on our members' ability to have frank discussions and hold the government to account while maintaining respect for each other and upholding the dignity of this institution. It is no accident that we've been able to maintain this delicate balance. Speaker Delory was keenly aware that his job was to maintain this balance for the sake of our territory, and he did so masterfully. This afforded him the respect of his fellow legislators, as well as speakers across Canada, among whom he was universally admired. During his tenure, Speaker Delory modeled to his eventual successors the qualities that a speaker should possess, and in that way, our Assembly has continued to benefit from his work all these years later. Speaker Delory was also responsible for bringing the Legislative Assembly closer to the people of the NWT in a number of ways. Thanks to his efforts, the Legislative Assembly's television channel is one of only 14 channels that the CRTC requires cable and satellite providers to carry and include in all basic packages. This has allowed us to broadcast our proceedings across Canada and rebroadcast in a number of Indigenous languages, which is something no other jurisdiction can lay claim to. Speaker Delory introduced the Mace Tour, which brings the Mace, the Speaker, the Clerk, the Sergeant-at-Arms, and more to schools across the territory to teach youth and communities about consensus government and the work of the Assembly. He also reinforced and greatly expanded the PAGE program and is responsible for ensuring that youth from all regions of the territory have the opportunity to come and work and learn in the Legislative Assembly. All these efforts fundamentally changed how the public understands and interacts with the Legislative Assembly. Paul's contributions were by no means confined to his work as MLA or Speaker. Far from it. When he was named Hay River's Citizen of the Year in 2019, it was really a recognition of his 5 decades of tireless volunteerism. His knack for fundraising, his 40 years of coaching, and the sheer incalculable number of hours he spent volunteering are the kinds of contributions that communities are built on. And there is no doubt that he was a pillar of the community. Mr. Speaker, there is so much more that could be said. I haven't even mentioned curling. Paul touched many people's lives, whether as a colleague, a friend, a teammate, a coach, a mentor. He will be missed by many, none more than his family. My condolences go out to his wife, Davida, his children, and his grandchildren. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Hay River North. Our thoughts and prayers are with the family and community. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Replies to budget address, day 1 of 7. Replies to the budget address, day 1 of 7. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take a moment to recognize Joyce Williams, a constituent of the community of Great Slave and a longtime Yellowknifer who celebrated her 80th birthday on January 13th. We wish her many more happy and healthy birthdays to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Detroit.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I alluded to the washboard situation on the stretch of highway from Junction 1 and 3 in my member's statement. My question to the Infrastructure Minister related to that stretch is, are there any immediate plans to repair that stretch of highway anytime soon? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Detroit. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the member will be happy because the Department of Infrastructure is resurfacing Highway 3 as from kilometers 0 to 23 this year and double layer of chip seal next year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Easy. Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Detroit.
Mussy for that good news. Mr. Speaker, I note the low employment in the community of Fort Providence, not to mention the number of our college heavy equipment operators that have completed the program but are not giving any opportunities for work in the field. My question to the Minister, and a possible solution to the shortfalls in unemployment, is it possible to look into the benefits of providing a training/employment program and at the same time providing the much-needed repairs? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Detroit. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Masito, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're always looking at innovative ways to get local Northerners to work, and because it forms an important part of our BIP process. And this is something we've done in the past with the Clicho All-Season Road. We were able to work with the contractors to be able to provide training and opportunities for some of the local citizens to give them some of the skills that they can move forward with their training. Masito, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Detroit.
Merci, Mr. Speaker. That's very promising. I like that idea that we use as many northern contractors and northern labor as possible, especially with we can move forward on training programs, because many of these people that come out of heavy equipment operator programs there are not hired by contractors because they lack experience. And this type of work, and there's lots of work in the Northwest Territories highways, enables them to gain more experience on the highway systems, operating equipment, flag persons, and whatnot. It's much needed. I realize that some contractors, northern contractors, will need southern or other contractors that are experienced in road repair or chip sealing. But as long as a majority of the workers are northern content, and for the contractors' sakes also. Mr. Speaker, it's more of a comment, and I don't have any more questions. That's good news that we're going to be moving on this project. Merci.
Thank you, Member. Taking his comment. Sure, we'll let the Minister reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I enjoyed the comment and some of the good news. However, I do want to speak a little bit more, and I should have answered this in his first question. I do want to elaborate a little bit more on some of the work that infrastructure has already invited a public tender. So we're doing Quarry at kilometer 188, which is Highway 1, and the tender is closing February 25th to be able to produce some necessary work for the Highway 3 resurfacing. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure the member will be happy, the survey contract will be awarded to Subarctic Survey this week to be able to survey Highway 3, which is at kilometers 0 to 23. Once the survey is complete, department staff will design the section. So we are looking at a multi-year public tender for the Highways 3 resurfacing to be able to start this work this July 2021. Masicho, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Tabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, BDIC loan payments to businesses are not being processed right now, but the interest rates are being charged on principal loans, therefore accumulating compound interest charges. Payments are being deferred for all BDIC business loans until April 1st, 2021. Can the Minister tell us if she believes the Government of the Northwest Territories should extend this time frame by 6 months or more and consider eliminating all interest being charged to BDIC loans during this pandemic? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for industry, tourism, and investment.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the BDSC is right now in the midst of a strategic planning process. They are halfway through. They've had their first meeting just before Christmas and are having a second one shortly. I know that their board is made up of business owners and business persons from across the Northwest Territories. I'm sure they are looking at this. I have had conversations with their CEO, who also assures me that this is something that's under consideration, whether or not to defer their loan payments further and or how long to do so. As to the interest rates of forgiveness of debts expressly, Mr. Speaker, they do not have the legislative authority to do that. Only FMB can be forgiving loans. But really at this point, my understanding is that businesses are continuing to communicate with BDIC. They're happy with the work that's being done there to support them, and that work is going to be ongoing. And I expect more to come, Mr. Speaker, well in advance of April 1st. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Sabacha.
Mr. Speaker, most of the financial aid to date given to the business community has come from the federal government. Can the minister provide us with an exact amount that the government of the Northwest Territories has contributed to the business community in relation to the pandemic aid? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Sabacha. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this actually involves more than just one department. The funding to airlines alone has been into the $20 million range on behalf of the GNWT. As well, of course, there are a variety of other programs. There's the projections of what we expect to spend, and then there's also actuals. So I want to commit to getting a more specific number back to the member, because even as I'm sitting here, and I imagine it comes as no surprise, departments quickly try their best to do the math as I'm sitting and waiting for an answer to come in. But the simple fact is we are into the millions of dollars in different programs. There's been money that's been spent in the tourism industry on GRIT. There's money that's now going to small businesses in terms of bookkeeping. There's money that's going out under finances, again, as I said, to the airline industry. There's a variety of these different pots going, and some of them have the pots to which they're expecting to spend the full amount, and some haven't spent their full amount yet. So I will certainly get a final number, but I do want to say there's a lot of pots of money. There's a lot of things happening, and yes, we're using the resources of the federal government. That's the responsible way to do this, is to fill the gaps that aren't filled by the federal government and to help support and enhance their programs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Sabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. More clarity on some of that second question would be great, because I know that most of the federal funds have come, that we've been using federal funds and nothing from the Northwest Territories government funds. Mr. Speaker, the NWT has a very small business community that is reliant on government economic activity to be sustained. Can the minister tell us if she thinks, as Minister of ITI and Finance, that there should be a balanced public and private sector economy in the Northwest Territories? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Sabacha. Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my own opinions on the matter really are not the answer. We conducted the budget dialogues this summer to have that kind of conversation with the residents of the Northwest Territories. And as ITI Minister, I have an opportunity to speak with business representatives from across different organizations as groups, as well as directly with members of the business community. We are a small economy, and we certainly are. It's not new that we remain an economy that is not particularly diversified. It's one that does have a large public sector reliance, and I don't expect that to necessarily change in the near future. But yes, of course, the simple answer is to say yes, it needs to be balanced, supports need to be balanced, and our efforts to grow our economy and diversify it need to be balanced. And there will continue to be anchor industries, just as there will be anchor industries in each community. It certainly is the intention of, I think, this government and the budget that's here today to continue to support all of those things so that we can have growth in individual industries in smaller regions, as well as in the anchor industries such as mining and the mineral resource sector, while also providing stability through the public service. Thank you.
Minister, final supplementary. Member for Sabacha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this minister is responsible for both ITI and Finance. Can the minister tell us if she would consider providing a one-time direct financial aid package to all small and medium-sized businesses that are majority owned by residents who reside in the NWT? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Sabacha, Minister responsible for ITI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, these are really the kinds of questions that need to be asked as we are right now engaging, as the Premier described yesterday, in putting together a COVID relief plan. These are exactly the kinds of questions to be asked. I'm happy to answer them. That said, some of the materials put out today in conjunction with the budget recognize and reflect that the recovery already has been uneven. Some sectors and industries have recovered, and some sectors and industries simply have not experienced the impacts to the same degree as others. We want to be able to leverage the resources that we have, including those of the federal government, so that all sectors of the economy can continue to recover if they need to, can grow, all sectors can grow, and that means really a more nuanced response. So we've had already significant impacts on the airline industry and significant funding to the airline industry. Tourism has seen particular impacts and is also seeing some specific funds directed in that regard. There is already the Northern Business Relief Fund, which helps with fixed costs. That is largely a CanNor fund, and it's one that seems to be working. I think really, Mr. Speaker, what we need to do now is find where those gaps are so that everyone can continue to benefit from recovery and relief in a more even way and that growth continue to happen in an even way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Mumfway.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
I made a member statement on interpreters because those positions are very important when we want more training. So I'm going to ask the ACE Minister.
Education culture, and also they relate to the government's commitment to training and certifying professional Dene language interpreters and translators. Mr. Speaker, the Minister's Indigenous Language Action Plan set goals for development of Dene interpreters and translators. Those goals include in-house training and also partnering with external organizations for further training and certification. Mr. Speaker, can the Minister describe the progress his department has made in pursuit of those goals? I'd like to hear more of timelines, Mr. Speaker. Merci.
Thank you, Member for Mumfway. Minister responsible for Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for his continued advocacy on this topic. I agree that people need to be able to access the government, and they should be able to access it in their own language. So the member is correct that we do have an action plan and has some items related to this. In the broad sense, there are a number of initiatives that the government is undertaking. There's a mentor apprentice program whereby fluent speakers, such as the member, would apprentice a younger or it doesn't have to be younger necessarily, but someone who doesn't speak the language. There's funding provided for this, and this is a way to help a new generation of speakers sort of gain those skills. We are working on developing a 2-year diploma program in conjunction with the University of Victoria, which has a lot of experience in this, and that would be to get speakers, it would be an adult immersion program, to get speakers to the point where they could become interpreters. The long-term goal is to have that program be the predecessor of perhaps a 3rd-year interpreter translator program. So it is on the horizon. In terms of some of the other goals or projects happening, this March actually, the department is putting together a virtual gathering of the 30+ translators and interpreters that are currently in the territory. And this is to identify specific needs for ongoing professional development so that we can better support those who are translating now, even if they don't have the professional certifications, and to get input into ways that we can attract new interpreter translators and expand the field. So those are some of the things that were happening, and I have to commend the member that it was his very friendly badgering that I think moved some of these things forward. And so, this is an example of members of this House working together to move things forward and make progress. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphy.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker,
Regarding the training is very important to us. I want to ask another question. Mr. Speaker.
I'm involved in that. I'm teaching a non-language speaker. And so basically I'm a teacher to this student. It's my daughter I'm teaching. And it's very rewarding to be part of that. So Minister has indicated that in committee's statement that I guess I'm walking the talk. And this needs to happen. And I'm encouraging a lot more people to get involved. Meryl Sundberg is involved in that as well, so which is great. Mr. Speaker, the second question I do have is based on partnership. Could the minister tell us precisely what external partnerships he signed for the training and certification of interpreters and translators? Could he update us on the partnerships that are currently involved in this process, Mr. Speaker?
Thank you, Member for Mumphy. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't have that level of detail with me right now, but for example, the mentorship apprenticeship program is in partnership with Indigenous governments, and as I said, we're partnering with University of Victoria and hopefully with Aurora College to develop a program that we can deliver throughout the North, but I can get that information for the member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Mumphy.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very interested in in-house training, and I'm glad that the minister is gathering via, whether it be video teleconferencing, gathering those experts at the community level in March. And I'd like to know, because this will be an in-house training, more specifically, has there been a dedicated extra funds for in-house translator and interpreter training in pursuit of those goals that I mentioned earlier? Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Mumphy. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I don't have those specific numbers. I'm not sure how this is being funded. Perhaps it's out of the current budget. There's been, some savings on travel, for example, and so maybe that's what's funding this. I'm not quite sure, but I can find that out and let the member know. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary. Member for Mumphy.
Mr. Speaker, yes, if Minister can provide that detailed information, that will be very helpful. My last question, obviously, is I guess what will be the process? Okay, there's a gathering in March, and obviously there is a process in place. Can the Minister describe, because I'm very interested in in-house training that's going to be happening, but at the same time, there is Aurora College that's involved as well. It has been involved in the past. Can the Minister describe how Aurora College has been enlisted to ensure that we have a sufficient number of professional interpreters and also translators in a system in the Northwest Territories? Could the Minister provide that if he has it now, or provide that later as well, Mr. Speaker? Merci.
Thank you, Member for Mumphy. Minister responsible for EC&E.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I can provide that information to the member along with the other information that I committed to. And I just want to note that Aurora College will be coming arm's length at some point in the next couple of years, and we can no longer sort of say this is what we're going to do at the college, but the college I foresee does have a very strong, in the future, the university I see has a very strong language aspect to it, and it would, to me, it'd be one of the highlights, one of the selling points of the university. So I foresee very strong partnerships going forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Nunukput.
Mr. Speaker, today my statement was in regards to the COVID pandemic and how it changed communities in Nunukput. I am wondering if I'm asking the Health Minister if she could possibly look and work with me in regards to put a team together to go to my communities and across the territory if possible, grief counselor, some few counselors to go into the communities for 4 or 5 days to actually sit with the people and listen to the hardships that they're going through and try to work with them to, help them. And I'm hoping the minister and maybe even the MACA minister team up together to find the fundings that's possible to do something like this across our territory. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nunukput. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank you, the member for Nunukput for his question. Mr. Speaker, we have community counselling programs available in every community who would be able to provide this service to residents. They wouldn't have to wait for a traveling team. They could connect with community counselling program and arrange to either have a socially distant appointment or a virtual appointment so that they could get the kind of help that the member is talking about. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Nunukput.
Mr. Speaker, our councillor just left Tuck. He's gone to Betchico, so they took our councillor. But good for him. I'm happy he's on. Like he wanted that change, right? Mr. Speaker, as MLA for Nunukput, I'm obligated for the health and safety of my people that I represent. I'm asking the minister. We find through the COVID Secretariat, through MACA, is there a possible way? Like I used to take athletes to go up and do hockey schools and talk about bullying and stuff like that in my communities, but this is different. This is more thing we could work towards of getting somebody professional into the communities instead of telemerge or telehealth or whatever you want to do it. You have to see the whites of their eyes, I guess you could say, to actually try to help. And I think something like this is going to be really good if it's possible to hit even the Beaufort Delta, our communities in the Beaufort Delta, where people in the small communities are actually really hurting with different types of grief and depression because there's nothing going on. Mr. Speaker, I'm asking the minister to try to work with me, with the MACA minister, the premier, to try to get something like this started for the region. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Nunukput. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I thank the member for Nunukput for bringing this forward. It has been a very difficult time. We know that there have been many deaths, not because of COVID necessarily, but just in the natural course of doing things. And because of the limitation on funerals, the grieving has not taken place in the way that we're accustomed to. And this has left people feeling at a loose end. I can't promise to bring resources to his community, but what I can say is that we will endeavour to fill that counselling position as soon as possible, and that in the meantime there's phone and video resources available, and if anyone is able to drive into Inuvik, they might be able to make an appointment there and see a counsellor. We've instituted a new process for taking people into counselling where there is no waiting list. There's no waiting time at all. You can be seen on the day that you make your appointment. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Nunukput.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only people that could drive in from is Tuck. I represent the most northerly riding in the territory. Mr. Speaker, our government gets $38,000 per year per person to provide service. Our government is obligated to provide service in regards to that and to our communities. I really want our government to take this recommendation seriously, to try to work with me. Just say yes. I'll use some of my constituency budget when we fly into the communities to go and do it with them. I really want to know, the pandemic changed everything. To try to fly into Inuvik to see a counsellor would be probably from Saks, probably $700-800 one way. From Ulakaktuk, $1,000. So can't do it. Too expensive. We need help, Mr. Speaker. Communities need help in the Delta. Communities need help in my riding. My people need help. So, Mr. Speaker, take my recommendations and just say yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Nunukput. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you. I do appreciate the member's passion for helping his constituents, and I do appreciate that 3 of the 4 communities in his riding are not accessible by road. He started off by talking about his own community, which is. I have to say that it's easier for them to use, for his constituents to use the helpline, to make a virtual appointment for counseling than to wait for health and social services to fill empty positions in the community or to gather the resources together for a traveling team. So I really encourage him to contact me about the resources that are available right now that he can refer his constituents to. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Nunukput.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for that, but I just want to remind the Minister and the government that you're responsible for all people in Northwest Territories. During this COVID-19 pandemic, please provide services to my people that I represent in Nunukput and across the Delta. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Nunukput. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I take that as a comment.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions today are for the Minister of Justice in regards to the correction staffing at our correctional facilities. The Minister made reference to a workplace assessment report that was commissioned by the Deputy Minister of the Department of Justice. Does the Minister plan to table this report? And if yes, when? And if not, how does the Minister intend to be transparent in how they will deal with the concerns raised by staff in the report? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for her persistent advocacy on behalf of her constituents. This is a very concerning situation. And it was some history. I mean, the member's statement was quite a retort to my statement, and it explained a long history of this. I will not be tabling that report. When this report was initiated, the employees, staff were told that it would be kept confidential. And while there was obviously a risk of it being released once it was distributed to all staff and to other parties, it was a risk that we knew we had to take. So, despite the fact that it's publicly available, I will still be treating it as confidential and upholding that bargain that we had with staff. However, I have committed to providing updates as we make progress, because if I don't stand up here and say what we've been doing, it could just be another report that gets shelved. If I don't hold myself publicly accountable, we risk that happening. So. I will do my best to ensure that we keep the public and the members updated. Thank you.
Minister, oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hear the Minister saying that he won't table the report because it was completed by employees with the intention that their words would be kept confidential, and so I can only respect the Minister's decision for that one. In regards to what the Minister said today, the Minister made reference to a Deputy Minister's meeting that was held in December where they discussed updating training, more recruitment, recertification. This House has seen an influx of training and an influx of dollars before, so I'm just wondering how this will be different than what this House has heard before, and how this is actually going to create the change that ministers before this one and now this minister has also said will come as a result of these moves. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member is right to be skeptical. She wouldn't be here if she wasn't. None of us would. Governments say lots of things, and sometimes they don't happen. And so I don't know if there's anything I can say that would assure me as a regular member. It has to be proven. We have to actually do the work. We have to come back on a regular basis and show that we're doing the work. And that's really the only way to prove ourselves. I will note that there is one difference, something that's never been done before, and that is that this is not just an effort of the department. It's not just an effort of the department and staff. We also have the UNW involved at a level they've never been involved at before, with reporting to the Deputy Ministers of Finance, of Justice, and to the President of the UNW. And so I think that that gives a much stronger voice to the staff, than has happened previously, and it's going to force a lot more collaboration and more positive outcomes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of the common undertones of what I'm hearing from the minister today, I believe, has to do with communication. So communication amongst staff, communication with members of the department, and also communication with this House and with the public. And I think that's really, really important and an important kind of undertone to carry through this entire process. And so with that, what I'd like to know is, part of getting buy-in for this process and from frontline staff is including them in it. In order to create positive change, the people who you're trying to create change for need to be involved in the process. Also, given that each of our facilities, our correctional facilities in the Northwest Territories, are so different and have such a different clientele, I'm wondering what the minister will do to ensure that staff are part of the process and have a say in what changes occur and how they occur at each facility. Thank you.
The member for Kamloops, Minister responsible for justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think communication causes most problems, not just in corrections, but just everywhere. Lack of communication really leads to misunderstandings. It leads to problems not being resolved. So the first thing that happened after this report came out is that senior staff, senior management went to the different facilities. They presented this information, and they listened to the staff and to hear what they had to say directly, not through a consultant. From that, they are compiling a what we heard report so that they can then distribute it to staff and say, are we hearing you correctly? Because sometimes when you tell the government something, they don't necessarily hear what you're saying. Maybe they hear what they want to hear. So we're starting a feedback loop. So that's one of the first things. As part of the plan going forward, there's also a communications plan so that everyone will know how they're going to be engaged, and you can ensure that it's happening. There'll be something to fall back on, or to check off the list. Basically, this has happened, and that's going to hold people accountable for making sure that communication happens. And as everyone here knows, communication is tough. Sometimes things change quickly, so we just have to put the effort into it and do our best. And that's the plan, Mr. Speaker. I think that if there was better communication 20 years ago, the member wouldn't be able to make that statement about all of the past statements that have been made. So this can be beat. I've talked to some employees from the Corrections Service, and they tell me about times when things were good. There were times when there was good communication between staff and management, and so I know it can happen again. This is not something that we can't overcome. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I heard the minister refer to two separate reports, one just now and one in their minister's statement. The one in the minister's statement was an HR plan, and this one was a what we heard report. I'm wondering if the minister can clarify if those are two separate reports or one and the same, and if both reports are intended to be tabled in this House during this session, or when we can expect to see them in committee as well. Thank you.
Thank you, member for Kamloops. Minister responsible for justice.
Thank you. So there's an overarching framework here that is going to guide how we move forward. As part of that, there's a communications plan, so everyone knows how people are going to be communicated with. The What We Heard report is really when the staff went out, the management went out in December, talked to staff, saying they put together a report saying this is what we heard. Are we hearing it? Are we hearing you correctly? So those are all different documents. There's a number of moving parts here. I'm happy to keep the committee updated to the best that I can. There's some operational and security sensitivities with things like the framework that really prohibit me from tabling a document like that. That being said, we do have to prove that we are making progress. So we'll find a way to ensure that the committee is kept up to date. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have all heard of Brian Sinclair, Joyce Eshquin, and our own Hugh Papik. These situations were caused by someone's opinion. Who advocates before it gets this serious? My questions for the Minister of Health and Social Services is, what option does someone have immediately if they feel they are not getting the help they need feel that they've been treated unfairly or with discrimination in the Health and Social Service Department, which includes the hospitals, clinics, health centres, and social service offices.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the question. My suggestion would be that the person and/or the people who are with that person speak to the nurse in charge or the patient care coordinator, and if they continue to be unsatisfied with the answers, they should call their MLA, who will be able to direct them to quality assurance and other resources that will help them to be heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So next time I will make sure when I'm treated badly, I'll call myself, and I did. So would the minister consider a position in each of the hospitals or regional centers that would assist with being an advocate for patients that need help navigating this system, talking with this, because not everybody, when they come in from the small community, know where to go, know how to communicate, and are afraid of the healthcare system. We do have history of not trusting the healthcare system in this country, Indigenous people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to think that everybody in our large healthcare facilities and in our small ones too is a navigator who is there to help patients access the care that they came to the hospital or the healthcare center for. We do have the quality assurance people, although they tend not to be standing in the foyer of the hospital ready to give advice. But there are people who work at the front desk in the Inuvik Regional Hospital, at the Stanton Territorial Hospital, who should be able to direct patients to the places they need to go and to direct them in the language of their choice. We have committed to providing culturally safe health care, and being able to direct people efficiently and in their language is certainly central to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Inuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hear the minister and I hear what she says. We do have great staff, but not necessarily are these staff trained to be able to understand a lot of the systems. This government assisted the Aurora College to create a nursing program 20 plus years ago. We've had 20 years of graduates of nursing. The goal of that program was to have Indigenous nurses working in their own communities for their own people. It's still not happening. So I would like to ask the minister again if we can have patient advocates, or and have them being nurses in these hospitals, because if we can't have nurses in these hospitals, then can we at least have nurses that can help our people, our Indigenous people, work through this system of if they feel that they've been discriminated against, or they don't even understand what they're doing, they're missing appointments, their medical travel is being booked on the day before they got to leave and they have no escorts. There's multiple things. But I think it needs a health background to be able to navigate this system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Inuvik Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I understand what the member is getting to there, that medical travel to a larger facility like the Inuvik Regional Hospital or Stanton Territorial Hospital can be quite a daunting prospect, and people may not feel comfortable asking the questions that they need to have the answers they need to navigate the system. I am not aware that there is a particular navigator who is on call in Stanton Territorial Hospital or Inuvik Regional Hospital. But that's certainly something that I can inquire about. I think the longer-term solution is to continue to train people in cultural competency so that they have a better understanding of some of the history and background that people bring to healthcare with them, a background of not being served well, in some cases not having good interactions, and to be able to work with people on the basis that they are not comfortable likely right where they are and they need some additional help. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Inuvik-Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hear the minister, and I know that we're supposed to be rolling out a very detailed cultural awareness campaign soon, and all of the NWT, GNWT staff are going to be, but there's no course in the world that's going to change somebody who's not going to, doesn't want to take it, you know, and that's the issue, and these are the issues, and it's, our people are still going to be afraid of the healthcare system, so they're not going to speak up, they're not going to advocate for themselves. So I again just want to push the minister to really look into these types of positions for our people in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Inuvik-Twin Lakes. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I realize there's no easy fix in this area. I don't believe that cultural competency training is optional in the health and social services world. We have committed ourselves to providing culturally sensitive care, in part because of the case that the member spoke about and other more recent cases that we've heard about on the news. So we want to provide a service in which all people in the NWT, whether they are newcomers to the NWT or they've been here since time immemorial, feel comfortable accessing the services they need to live their best lives. Thank you.
Minister, oral questions. Oral questions, member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Can the Minister tell us what her department is doing to increase supports for seniors who are aging in place and may be feeling the mental health impacts due to the restrictions around COVID-19, and whether or not she plans to increase those supports given the CPHO's orders are likely to remain in place until the fall? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to say that there are a number of services in place for seniors. Because home care is in place in most communities, they have been providing some additional supports, such as phone calls and visits that are above and beyond what they would have provided before COVID. And in communities where there are usually day programs, then there have been staff who have been reassigned to provide support one-on-one with people because people are not gathering for the day program at this point, given the COVID-19 pandemic. Within long-term care, there have been extra efforts to screen residents for depression, knowing that that is a possibility, as well as providing for family and friends to visit in very controlled circumstances, to deliver letters on behalf of families, to organize virtual calls so that there is that connection between the people in long-term care and the people who love them. As well, the mental health supports that are available to every person in the NWT are, of course, available to seniors, and that includes the community counseling program, which I spoke about earlier, the NWT helpline, and then onwards, On the Land Healing Fund, anything that the community is doing with On the Land, and of course through their healthcare provider. If they disclose that they are feeling depressed or lonely, it will be a response by the primary healthcare provider to assist the senior to find the services that they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was asking about aging in place, not necessarily about the seniors' homes, but I'm glad to hear that they are doing that. I don't really think many of the seniors who are isolating and feeling the depression of COVID impacts are going to be heading out on the land. so I'm not sure that that's really a support to seniors aging in place. Moving on, I'd like to know how many people are over the age of 60 in the Northwest Territories, and how many of those seniors have received at least one round of the vaccination. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. According to the NWT Bureau of Statistics, as of July 1st, 2020, there are approximately 6,594 persons aged 60 and older in the NWT, and I'll have to get back to the member with the number who have received vaccines who are over 60. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Minister. Oral questions, Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when the minister returns with that information, I'm going to guess she's also going to have to come back with the next question I have, which is what is the current COVID vaccine distribution broken down by demographic group? I've also asked the minister and not received a response to how many extras doses have been given out. A response received of "we're not tracking that" is not acceptable to me. All you need to do is take the number of appointments you had, the number of doses administered, and subtract them to find out how many extra vials have been opened and distributed to people of non-priority groups. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're giving the vaccine on a priority group basis. So everybody who lives in a small community without a resident nurse who is over 18 has had the opportunity to receive the first dose. We have also, of course, prioritized people who live and work in long-term care and in other congregate settings like jails and shelters. We have also prioritized frontline staff because of their connection to health care. And we have prioritized people who have chronic or multiple medical conditions. So we have not broken it out by demographic. It's broken out by need as determined by the Chief Public Health Officer. So that's how it's been broken out. The question about tracking the numbers of people who've had doses, we've given out 12,241 doses so far. We are, to be perfectly honest, putting a lot of time into keeping up with the Public Health Agency of Canada reporting, and we have no additional time to answer the member's question. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not really very concerned with how you generally report or how the department would report their statistics. The priority groups actually would be considered to be a demographic, the demographic being their high priority for different reasons. So I would still consider that to be a breakdown by demographic group and would appreciate having those numbers. Moving on, how would seniors who are not technologically savvy reach out to your department or to the department to get help navigating not only the COVID vaccine forms online, but any other online services they may be required to use? Is there a specialized helpline for seniors to call that will actually be answered and they can get people to walk them through the programs? Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Great Slave. Minister responsible for Health and Social Services.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the member may know, there is a helpline for seniors. Seniors could call there. They could call their local health center. They could call the system navigator, health system navigator, invite the member to look that up and put it on her Facebook page. We, as a department, realize that people at different ages have different communication styles, and we're fully aware that elders are generally not using computers and other digital methods of communication, and so we've made an effort to communicate with them on local radio stations, through the newspaper, through posters, and even through door-to-door visits in some cases to make sure that they are aware of the opportunity to be vaccinated. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. My question is for the Minister of Finance on the Government Renewal Initiative. The Minister announced back in October the Government Renewal Initiative, but it was a little bit lean on details. Can the Minister provide any more details now on the steps, stages, or phases of the Government Renewal Initiative, how regular MLAs will be involved, and how this is going to be communicated to our workforce and the general public? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I actually love talking about government renewal, so I'll try not to take the full 10 minutes. We're starting out right now with the Department of EC&E, Department of Finance, and the government renewal process takes 2 steps. And I should start by mentioning that all departments have been involved quite extensively in terms of looking at government renewal, in looking at the program evaluation process, in understanding how it's going to unfold. So this has certainly been a government-wide process, government-wide initiative, and one that I think has already been well communicated within government departments, and materials have already gone to the committee. I'm happy to do a detailed briefing with committee and provide even further information to them. I can say that when a department goes through the process that is envisioned as of right now, that we're looking at 2 parts. So the first part is to gather the information about the programs, do an inventory of what programs are there, and to then go through an evaluation system of those programs. There will be involvement from the frontline workers. That is critical that the frontline workers be involved. They are often the ones that understand where the efficiencies lie and what the value to the residents has been. So there's quite a bit that I could unpack within all that, Mr. Speaker. I'll leave it at that and see if there's perhaps another follow-up that could guide what direction or what further information the member is looking for at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for her Minister's statement in response to my question, but you know, and I want to be generous here that the Minister has shared information with us as regular MLAs. My questions here today are to try to get this out into the public because nobody really knows what's going on. So can the Minister tell us, she just mentioned that finance and I believe education, culture and employment are the first 2 departments that are going to be up for review. Is there a full schedule that she can provide to perhaps table in the House so the public and our workforce knows what's going on? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can certainly provide the expected schedule of having 2 departments go through the process over time. And we're looking in general to maintain 1 larger department, 1 smaller department going through the process. The reason for that is essentially its internal capacity. The certified evaluators that we have, the financial analysts that we have, and individual departments, it's quite a lot of work for them. And we're trying to do this by funding internally as much as possible, using different types of techniques. They're, trying to manage doing it quickly, but still doing it in a way that we can, again, not overburden departments as we go through. So yes, EC&E and Finance are the first 2 up, if you will. We're expecting this to take somewhere between 3 and 4 years to cover all 11 departments, and I can provide how we expect that to go for each of these 2 parts for each of the 2 sets of departments over time. I'll be happy to provide that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for that, and I look forward to seeing that document tabled in the House soon. So just in case anyone's interested, I do believe in strong program evaluation, but I'm just not sure the government renewal initiative is the right way to go about this. I'm also worried about that short-term savings will eclipse long-term benefits, and that the differential impacts of changes on disadvantaged populations will not be adequately considered. So what assurance can the Minister provide that the government renewal initiative will adequately consider the long-term and differential impacts of changes on programs and services? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Member for Frame Lake. Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I can't say it enough. This isn't simply a reduction exercise. By going about this in a way that is methodical and that relies on evaluation rather than just cherry picking or targeting from somewhere within the senior ranks of what programs and services we think might not provide value, that is not the way to make an evidence-based decision about good government value. That is exactly why we want to go department by department, why we want to actually look and do that inventory of what is in fact being offered, and then involve the frontline workers to ensure that we understand the true value and benefit of all the individual programs and services that we offer. This is a way to be, in fact, evidence-based when we're making decisions and not just say that we're evidence-based. We're going to go out and actually gather the evidence that shows the government what we do well, and where we have duplication. And this is actually a chance, Mr. Speaker, to plug one other thing that matters deeply to me, and that's the GBA Plus, Gender-Based Analysis Plus approach to making decisions within the government. You'll recall that I had said that all decisions are now going to be analyzed with that lens of GBA Plus, which looks not only at gender, but all identity factors. And although we have that now, it's happening, it's working its way through, I still think there's a lot that can be done there. And as we go through this process, that lens can continue to be brought forward. So I am confident in saying that we're going to be looking at how government renewal, how the programs and services we offer are impacting different people in different ways, and doing so, as I said, I believe today in the budget speech, so that we are more equitable across the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Framley.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. I want to thank the Minister for her passion today. I'm worried, though, that a lot of time and effort is going to go into this government renewal initiative, and it will not deliver the results we need to head our government going off a fiscal cliff. And I think that's being driven by overspending on large infrastructure projects. We need to make some tough decisions and choices now, as we can't possibly accomplish all the items in Cabinet's mandate. So what assurance can the Minister give me today that the results of the government renewal initiative are going to be delivered on time, rather than making tough decisions right now? Merci, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member for Framley. Minister responsible for Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I mean, we have to. I'm inclined to sit down. I suspect that response won't be satisfactory to my colleague across the floor. We have to get this right. And Mr. Speaker, we make tough decisions all the time. Mr. Speaker, today we tabled a $2 billion budget. In order to make tough decisions, it is better, in my view, to do that based on evidence, and to do that based on evidence that is gathered methodically, and to do that in a way that is based on evidence that looks at programs and services across the Northwest Territories with a vision of value. We want to have value and not just, it needs to be methodical and evaluative. So that, Mr. Speaker, is really at the core of what the Government Renewal Initiative will be. The first two departments that go through, Finance and EC&E, should have those processes complete in time to see impacts on the business planning that goes through for the next budget cycle. That then will allow everyone to see that we can, in fact, be making tough decisions. It will, in fact, demonstrate where those decision points may lie. The tough decisions happen all the way through. I mean, budgeting is a process that I've said many times is cyclical. It takes all year. In fact, I suspect the folks over in Finance are going to be starting on the 22-23 budget very soon. So tough decisions have to happen continually. We can't wait till the future, but we also can't put all the eggs in the basket and say that it's all because of the infrastructure plan and the infrastructure projects. If we don't have infrastructure, we don't have health or education or corridors for communications or transport or energy. It is not one thing that is driving the challenges that we have financially or fiscally. It is all the things. So, Mr. Speaker, on budget day, this is my chance to give one more mini budget address, I suppose. We have to do all the things, and we have to make those choices, but we're going to do it with evidence, and we're going to do it with evaluation, and that's our way forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Kamloops.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I just have one last question for the Minister of Justice in regards to the employee assessment and the follow-up work that they're doing. Mr. Speaker, I believe I'll steal some words from Minister Wozniak where she said we have to get it right, and I think that this is one of those instances where we do have to get this right. And so I'd like to know what the Minister has set up and what his department has set up for people who work in corrections that don't feel like this is going well or feel like they need a voice to be a path to be able to say to the Minister, this is not going well, this is not being addressed, and I'd like to know that that is happening in a safe space and in a confidential space. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Minister responsible for Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think a feedback loop is the most important thing in terms of communication. We have to know what the people on the front line are thinking. You know, that's where the expertise lies in the day-to-day operations. And if we don't have that, this is all for naught. This is going to fail. So if someone feels like they're not being heard, they can talk to their supervisor. If that's where the problem is, you can talk to the union. If you still feel like you're not being heard, talk to the ADM. If that doesn't get you anywhere, talk to the deputy minister. This is actually what the deputy minister in the department has been saying since day one, since this initiative rolled out. That's how serious they are about communication. Since when does the deputy minister tell frontline staff, "Oh, call me if you have a problem"? But that's what we're doing. That's why I feel that, you know, despite the member statement earlier, where she tried to take the wind out of my sails maybe about the possibility of success, I do feel confident that we can be successful here because there's commitment right from the deputy minister all the way down. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister, and I appreciate that. I think that sometimes when you work on the front lines, it can be very intimidating to call up a Deputy Minister. I can assure the public that the Deputy Minister of Justice is very approachable, but I'd also like to encourage people to reach out to their MLAs. It's why they're here, and if they feel like they can't approach a Deputy Minister, I really would like people, I'd like people in the corrections industry to not feel fearful about passing information through their MLAs, and we'll be sure to follow up with the Minister on the floor of the House. Thank you.
Thank you, Member for Cam Lake. Take that as a comment. Colleagues, our time for oral questions has expired. Written questions. Written questions. Returns to written questions. Returns to written questions. Petitions. Oh, sorry. Replies to Commissioner's address. Replies to Commissioner's address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports of standing and special committees. Reports of standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, Main Estimates 2021-2022. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Minister responsible for infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I felt left out yesterday, so today I'm going to table 6 documents. Follow-up letter to oral questions 254-19 (2), transportation safety. A follow-up letter for oral questions 278-19 (2), marine transportation services. A follow-up letter to oral questions 282-19 (2), marine transportation double-hulled barges. Follow-up letter to oral questions 298-19 (2), EDSO Highway Maintenance Camp. A follow-up letter to oral questions 335-19 (2), Dempster Highway, and a follow-up letter to oral questions 336-19 (2), Clecho All-Season Road Project. Queen Aini, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notices of motion. Notices of motion. Motions. Motions. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. Notices of motion for the first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Consideration in Committee of the Whole of Bills and Other Matters. Member Statement 77-19 (2). Table Document 165-19 (2). Table Document 166-19 (2). Table Document 167-19 (2). With Member for Nivik Lakes in the chair.
Okay, I call Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Mr. Norn.
Mace Tour, Madam Chair, I move that the chair rise and report progress.
All right, there's a motion on the floor to report progress. The motion is in order, non-debatable. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. I'll now rise and report progress.
May I have the report of the Committee of the Whole, please? Member for Nivik-Twin Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering member statement 77-19-2, table document 165-19-2, table document 166-19-2, table document 167-19-2, and would like to report progress. And Mr. Speaker, I move that the report of Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Nivik-Twin Lakes, do we have a seconder? Member for Nivik-Boot Lake. All those in favor? All those opposed? Any abstentions? Motion's carried. Third reading of bills. Third reading of bills. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Orders of the day for Friday, February 5th, 2021, 10 a.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, replies to budget address, day 2 of 7, acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to commissioner's address, petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motions, motion 26-19-2, notice of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, minister statement 77-19-2, table documents 165, 166, and 167-19-2, report of committee of the whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. This House stands adjourned until Friday, February 5th, 2021 at 10 a.m.
Order.